My name is Bert Visotzky, and I am the Lou Stein Director of the Finkelstein Institute for Religious and Social Studies. We're actually celebrating the 75th year of the Institute for Religious and Social Studies here at JTS, and we welcome everyone here. The Jewish Theological Seminary is celebrating its 125th year, and we're very proud and look forward to the next 125. I want to open by saying that our Chancellor, Arnie Eisen, and his right-hand man, Mark Gary, are literally, as we speak, on their way back returning from Israel. And I hope that those of you who subscribe to one thing or other of JTS will have the opportunity to read his letter from Israel, which he wrote just before departing today. And it really brings you very much up to date on the current scene and what it's like to be there in the war while the bombs are going off. And I was deeply moved by it. So I'm sorry Arnie can't be here tonight, but we will all benefit from the fact that he visited Israel, showed his support there, and shares with us a firsthand account. I'm thrilled to be here tonight with two writers who I have been reading for many, many years and enjoying immensely. And how blessed I am to be at the Jewish Theological Seminary that I can meet writers of this stature and engage with them. On my far left, so that's not a political comment, in the dark blue, Susan Isaacs is the author of 13 books, the most recent of which, actually probably more than 13 books, 13 novels. The most recent of which is Goldberg Variations, and it is the story of one Gloria Garrison, née Goldberg. And although she stole the name of the book from Johann Sebastian Bach, the plot of the book is, as it turns out, very much like King Lear. All right, we take it back. It's not like King Lear.
It's Shakespeare sighing.
But I think it's your first book, Susan, where you actually very explicitly, openly address Jewish themes. And the theme of the book is repentance, and that of course, is our topic tonight. The fiction of Teshuvah, or the fiction of Teshuvah, depending on how you want to read it. Susan is the author of Compromising Positions, and the character there, many of you know that book, Judith Singer, who is a character in every sense of the word, appeared in yet another one of Susan's novels as well. Born in Brooklyn, educated at Queens College, her best-selling novels include Close Relations, Almost Paradise, Any Place I Hang My Hat, and As Husbands Go. Her husband sitting in the front row. A recipient of the Writers for Writers Award and the John Steinbeck Award, Susan serves as the chairman of the board of Poets and Writers, do I have that right? Is a past president of Mystery Writers of America. She lives on Long Island with her husband, prominent attorney Elkin Abramowitz, and we're happy that Elkin is here. Susan is now a member of the board of directors of the seminary, and we're just really thrilled with your participation. On my immediate left is Linda Fierstein. Linda graduated from Vassar College. I'm a Vassar dad. And the University of Virginia Law School. This lawyer motif is going to haunt us all night. She joined the Manhattan District Attorney's Office in 1972 as Assistant District Attorney and was promoted to the head of the Sex Crimes Unit in 1976 and was chief of that unit for more than 2 decades, and she really made it one of the most famous and well-run units in the United States. She is America's foremost legal expert on sexual assault and domestic violence. Her 14 Alexandra Cooper novels are international bestsellers, the most recent of which is Nightwatch, which bears a curious resemblance to some of the things you may have been reading in the paper about a sexual assault that took place in a very fancy hotel. I must, though, mention her book before that, Silent Mercy, in which the Jewish Theological Seminary makes a cameo appearance.
thanks to Alan Levine, my brother-in-law, who brought me here, and Rabbi Wolf, Mark Wolf, who toured me through and lectured me about and let me spend a lot of time in your library. So thank you.
So Linda was born in Mount Vernon, New York. She lives in Manhattan and on Martha's Vineyard. And her late husband, Justin Feldman, was a fabled attorney in New York and national circles. My one qualification for being here with them is I'm also married to an attorney, but not quite doing what they do on a daily basis, which to me is an extraordinary act of imagination and brutally difficult to do, because if you read either of them, the voices on the page read so easily and so readily, and they ring so true. And that doesn't just happen. That comes from revising. So I want to put my first question to both of you. I think, Susan, you can start. How did you begin writing?
How did I begin writing? Because I failed an aptitude test for computer programming. And the only job available was something at 17 magazine. And I had been on my college newspaper, which is why they suggested it. And I went in there and I started writing advice to the lovelorn. Wound up writing articles like How to Say No to a Boy, which was news to me. And then also as a volunteer and then eventually as a freelancer, began doing some political speech writing just to broaden my horizons into something adult. And when I left both jobs to stay home with my kids, I was reading a ridiculous number of mysteries, and I became deranged and thought to myself, I can do that, and which is, I think, how many writers start, and that's how I came to it.
And do it you have. And I over dinner was asking Susan, because some of you who know her books know that she captures the voice of Long Island in a mischievous but remarkably accurate way. And since both of them write novels that involve policemen, I suggested somewhat timorously that in Linda's book, there's always perhaps a flirtation between the female attorney and the policeman. And in Susan's book, if a cop walks onto the page, you know that the character's going to sleep with him. She said it had something to do with the uniform. So I want to ask Linda, though, what about you? How did you begin writing? Because you actually had a day job.
Right, I did. I first have to say I'm thrilled and honored to be back here. And secondly, with Susan and Elkin are two of my most beloved friends and people I admire enormously. And Susan's one of the reasons I tried to write. But I grew up, I wanted to write all my young life, adolescent, teen. I went to Vassar, which had a great English lit department, because I wanted to be Edna St. Vincent Millay or Mary McCarthy. And I had a very loving but very practical father who used to say to me, "You have nothing to write about, get a job." And so I went to law school with a view to doing public service, and found that I was developing an extraordinary body of things to write about. And actually, when Compromising Positions came out, and I did not know Susan and Elkin, I was prosecuting a dentist in New York, Marvin Teicher, eerily familiar. And I'm thinking, wow, wow, I wish I could have written this book. It was really my first introduction to Susan. And so I was asked to write a nonfiction book about the work that our office had done in the late 80s. When I finished that book, I went to Bob Morgenthau and said, now that that's done, I've always wanted to write crime fiction. And he said, everybody thinks they can write a book, be my guest. And I started to write. So it's just something I always wanted to do, and was lucky enough to be able to do it on my husband's time while I had the day job, as he used to say.
So I want to ask both of you, because you write novels that require a fairly complicated bit of plot, and following the plot or unraveling the plot, whether it's your detectives or other characters, is essential to the novel. But I think I'm not off base to suggest that for both of you, though you get plot perfect and the tone is always pitch perfect, I think your books are both character driven. So I want to ask you as writers, this is a very writerly question, how do plot and tone contribute to your shaping of a character?
A character comes to me. At the beginning of each novel, a character or more than one character comes and says, "Tell my story." And I get a feeling for that character. I hear the voice. Not in the sense of Joan of Arc, but I have a clear, and what plot does is allow that character a stage on which to act out whatever particular struggle is going on. In this book, it was Teshuvah. In Shining Through, I had this character, everything was fine. I had a real good sense of her yearning for this man who was supposedly above her. But until I put her in World War II, which was a chance to play out those more clear class distinctions, and also a chance to show her stuff as a hero and to gradually grow in moral stature. I didn't have anything. I just had a character in search of a book.
I do what I've tried to talk to Susan about. It's so much easier. It's sort of cheating because I have the same main characters. I write a series, and so the prosecutor and the two detectives are back in every book. So I start without the trauma of trying to fully create new characters for each book. And so I do think the books are very character-driven. They are written in the first person from the young, thin, blonde prosecutor's point of view, but easy to imagine. And then the plotting, I mean, the crime novel audience is very demanding. I mean, people are quick to tell you if they don't read crime novels and will never read your books. They do that all the time. But there is a big audience for people who like murder mysteries, crime novels, and detective fiction. And the plotting is very, very critical because these people want their red herrings. They want to guess. They want to be taken on a bit of a ride. They don't want a book that ends with the killer after 400 pages coming out from behind the screen, never having been introduced before and not having a motive and just saying, aha, I did it, and book over. So the plotting really has to be pretty meticulous about showing the possible suspects all along the way, developing them, developing motives so that the reader thinks they perhaps have it at some point until you introduce somebody with more of a motive and more opportunity. So for me, the main characters are very clearly drawn at this point. Trying to make them evolve and keep them interesting is a challenge. And plot is something that is painstaking to put together when I am at the beginning of a new project.
I'm kind of fascinated by this because Susan was talking about the fact that in all of her novels, but for one, she's created a new character. And the one time she repeated a character, she said it was because that character came and offered herself to be in the novel. You have had the, I think, opportunity, and I don't know whether it's good news or bad news. You said it, there's a little of both. In using the same character novel after novel, the character may or may not resemble the author. Would you two talk with each other about what's the pluses and minuses in that? I mean, what do you get each time you have somebody new? Don't you wish you could explore somebody for 14 novels?
Sometimes, yes. And also how the relation. I mean, one of the wonderful things about Linda's books are not only that the characters keep going in a linear way, but they react and interact differently from each other, and the relationships change. So I think that's what you have there. In mine, what I get out of this is a new universe each time. I'm essentially, when I write a novel, I'm writing a fictional autobiography. So if it's in first person, I'm taking that part of the character's life that's most important and doing their story. And then once I'm finished, not only am I done with them, they're done with me. They don't need me anymore, and we wish each other well. In the case of Judith Singer, who came back, it was only because I had to write a short story, which I'd never done before. I was in an absolute state of panic, and I had to produce this thing for an anthology. And she came and said, "It's all right. Don't worry. I'm here. Well, let's do this thing together. You can come back to me." And then I was so enchanted with being with her again because she'd matured in such an interesting way that I stuck with her for the next novel.
I want to not lose that, but I want to give you a chance to talk about the advantages of 14 books with the same character. That's a long marriage.
It's a long marriage, and it's there's a certain comfort level. I mean, you get to it. When I finish a book, take a break and start to plot and pick a theme for the next book, it's very reassuring to know who that world is peopled with. I get to invent new characters, new suspects, new friends, a new romantic relationship from time to time. But it's very easy going in because I know what they're going to eat in a restaurant. I know what they're going to drink at the end at this hour of the day when they want a cocktail. Just saying. And so there is that kind of comfort, and then there is the longing, a little bit of writer's envy, to not create the new universe. And so I think most of us who do series love that you develop readers who come back to those characters, who want to see those characters again and see how they react in a different situation. And then most of us have a little list growing. There are stories I can't tell through those characters that I would like to do in what we call standalones. And so I have a short list of novels I would like to do the year that I hired James Patterson to write 12 books for me or something like he's doing now with a stable of writers. But it's a toss-up. And so far, I've stayed with the comfort level.
So both of you have used the phrase now, inventing the universe. And
I copied her. That's all.
I appreciate that.
I often do.
But I also appreciate it's a common trope, but I think there's some reality to it that when you are writing fiction and when you are creating characters either over the long haul or anew each time, you're playing God. So what's it like to be God? Well,
it's God with a small g. So it's... there's the real competition out there. What it's like is wonderful because if you're a novelist, if your idea of fun is sitting alone in a room for a year or two or three and telling yourself stories, it's magic. This is what I've written several screenplays, two films have been made. I've done essays. I've, gone out and done reporting. Nothing pleases me as much as creating their looks, their beliefs, their humor or lack of it, etc. It's just, and I'm putting up the wallpaper in their bathrooms. My friend here, who's my best friend Susan, who's a interior designer, probably wouldn't approve of the wallpaper I chose anyway.
Elkin, it's a good thing she does it in the novel and not in the bathroom every year. But now yes, you have the long haul. What's that like? This ongoing demand on you to keep Alexandra fresh, keep her interesting, find her new challenges. figure out whether she's ever going to sleep with that cop.
It's great fun. I mean, it is like as Susan just said. I mean, it's starting the idea of starting with a blank screen and page 1, and at some point getting to page 432 of the manuscript, and you have created an entire world and peopled it and filled it with hopefully crackling dialogue and explored current issues or political themes or the law, in my case, aspects of the law. It's quite thrilling to be able to do. And I think probably what both of us find, certainly for me, because I'm always thinking in those characters, wherever I am, everything is fodder and material. And somebody says something clever, and it's, I write it down, and it's you meet somebody with a particular quirk, and that person may become more fully developed in the book. And when I started writing and was still in the DA's office for the first 5 books I wrote, nobody took me seriously. Nobody among my peers in the office took it seriously at first. And by the 3rd book, people would drop by at the end of the day and say, I said the most hilarious thing today to Judge Smith. And perhaps if I order you the minutes, you can work it into the plot of your next book. So small g, it's a lot of fun to, it's not the worst pressure I've ever had.
Yes, although like Adam and Eve, they have to be careful what they, reckon with once they've started that process.
Oh, yes, they do.
So, Susan, I want to turn to you because you have just an ineffably light tone. My wife grew up on Long Island, and I can attest to this, that you have captured that Long Island voice really perfectly. But there's a fine line, and it's I think, a complicated fine line, to write with sympathy for your characters and not write parody. So how do you negotiate that?
Well, in part, I think, because I live there. But no, I'm part of that. I'm part of the world I'm satirizing. And there's the push-pull within me is always, for someone who sits alone in the room, to be part of a community. Whether it's a community of poets and writers, whether it's a synagogue, whatever it is, to be part of that world and to be off by myself making observations, making snarky asides, seeing real wrongs going on in that world that offend me deeply. So because I have to live in that world, it's and choose sometimes to come out into it. I guess I don't want to alienate everyone else in it.
So you only go thus far and not further.
I never hold myself back. I don't think it's in my nature to be a real iconoclast, to go smashing down everything, and being, really a hard-edged, tough guy.
But still, writers make choices, and it may be your natural voice, but you've chosen a fairly light touch when, throughout your novels, in fact, you take up very serious ideas about the human condition. So why write that as opposed to philosophy?
Because this is my talent. Actually, my daughter's a philosopher, and she's because she's much more cerebral than I am. I am much more interested in the everyday, in how people interact and in what kind of shoes they're wearing.
Jewelry.
Well, And
I didn't say shoes. She meant jewelry.
I know, but I didn't want to start staring at your earrings again. Okay. But this is the way. I mean, each character has a voice, but the author also has a voice. and you have to stay true to that voice. And growing up as I did, as a woman, as an outsider within the Jewish community, where the only rule was no slacks on Yom Kippur. Growing out, you learn to be, and being a child of the 40s and 50s, you learn to be a people pleaser. You learn, and so to become a real, edgy writer is not for me. My edges were worn down not only by my culture but by myself.
Okay, and now if I may turn to the prosecutor.
Yes.
Your characters can be, I think, tougher and a little edgier. But one of the things that has struck me throughout your novels is that there are two leitmotifs that you can find in almost all the books. One is just this constant flow of fascinating facts about New York history. Your love of the city in the novel is comparable to Woody Allen's on the screen. I mean, it's just there. You really see every detail of New York, and you savor it. And that's not all you savor, because all of your books also inevitably have your characters settling down at a lovely restaurant for a very, not only fine meal, but one that is deliciously described. What I want to know is, how does your description of New York and your description of food, how do they serve you as the novelist moving your plot and character forward?
Okay. Thanks for the Woody Allen line. I'll treasure that. For me, loving crime novels and really having grown up on them, I've never liked thrillers that are just car chases and shootouts and speed and action. And so I was looking for some kind of self-branding, something to interest myself while I stayed in the theme of a book for a year. And as often was the case in real cases in New York, you'd look at institutions that were very familiar by day and places that I'd been many times, but many of them have a very dark underbelly. Bad things have happened in them. And in my second book, it's set in a fictional hospital in New York, and it's not about the real murder, but I was sparked by the fact that in Bellevue in the 1980s, there was a young woman doctor working in her office late at night, and she was murdered by a man who's not the killer in my book, who happened to be a homeless man living on the roof of Bellevue, who would come into the hospital at midnight when everybody was gone, and he'd just take dirty lab coats out of the laundry, and he'd he'd stay alive by eating off the remainders of food on the food trays. And he went in to rob this woman and attacked her. So it was my first idea of using a hospital. I mean, what we think of as a benign, friendly place where we go to get help, and the population at Bellevue in a given day is more than 10,000, 15,000 people when you consider patients, doctors, floral delivery, linen delivery, food delivery, all of those people. So that gave me the idea. And museums, some of our museums have a very dark history. Lincoln Center, there was a murder at the Metropolitan Opera, if you remember, of a violinist who was killed between acts when she went backstage to try and find a conductor. So for me, it was being able to get into these places, and remarkably, like JTS, even though you're writing about these terrible crimes, you find some good-natured person who, if you describe these places lovingly, which I think is what I do because it's the fabric of New York that so fascinates me, there's almost always somebody willing to make the introduction to get you in the door, and someone who says, I mean, Beverly Sills, I couldn't get into the Museum of Natural History, although run by a very good friend of mine, because she said, if you ever kill someone in this museum, I'll never talk to you again. So the next year, my husband said, call Beverly Sills. You were doing one at the Met, and there had been the murder. So I didn't mess around at the lower levels, and Beverly Sills said, I think I have the most beautiful house in the world. I would love you to see it. I would love you to write about it. Do justice, get the killer. But welcome to my house. So I loved it. It keeps me interested, and it's sort of people who read my books, I think, they would not come back if they didn't enjoy that kind of thing.
So my next question comes back to the issue of food, because I think you use food in the ways that some novelists might use weather, or a movie score might use music. You use food to set a tone, and your chef, Luc Roger, has become a great love interest of your protagonist. So I have to ask, is there going to be a Luc Roger cookbook anytime soon?
A thing of the past. A thing of the past. So Luke was created because before I met Justin, my wonderful husband, I actually had a romance with a Frenchman who was a restaurateur. Not the way my husband described him, but not the right place and time for that. So I used to have notebooks. I would sit there when I would go to this beautiful little village, Mougins, in the south of France, and it was an education in great food and wine, and I kept notebooks while Andre, his name was working, and I found all those notebooks, and I wanted to use them in something. So finally, 20 years into our marriage, when my husband was comfortable enough for me to say the word Andre or we, which he always, when I said W-E, he heard it as we. It was very threatened. So I said, okay, we're going to give her a Frenchman love interest, and Justin was fine with it. So Luke's been there a few books, and most of the mail is running heartily against Luke as not being substantive enough for my character's life, that she does this very intense, serious job, and he's a little too much about fluff. And
so I have to ask, was it when you first introduced Luke that you actually started also mentioning Justin by name in your novels?
No, Justin. No, Justin's been in every book from the first one. It was, as you know, if you follow Alfred Hitchcock put himself in every movie with a cameo, just at a bus stop or walking in or out of a door. And it was my homage to my husband to just make him, no disrespect to any of the wonderful litigators in the room, but I always described him as the most prominent litigator in New York, Justin Feldman, when Alex had a problem. So that's his cameo, and happy to have him.
So now we're getting to the topic of the evening, because we've talked about character and character development, and it's kind of a truism that there's coming-of-age novels, there's growth novels, there's the change of heart of the protagonist, or you have an antagonist who maybe turns around or maybe gets caught and then pleads for mercy and either does or doesn't change. The possibility of a personality changing is, I think, an endless fascination for all of us as human beings. First of all, because I think we all struggle with it. There are things we wish we could change, and the Jews in the room, kind of every Yom Kippur, we make our list, or some of you every New Year's Eve make your list, and then the next year the list is remarkably similar. So I'm fascinated by this. Is this notion that characters change, is it only something that happens in fiction? Or is it real enough that you can write about it in fiction because there's verisimilitude? People think, well, could happen. Maybe it would happen to me.
Well, I got started on this in Goldberg Variations. I deal with Teshuvah when I heard a holiday sermon. Our Rabbi, Michael Mishkin, is here. And
Stand up, Michael.
Yeah. Yay. He gave an absolutely wonderful sermon that got me thinking about change. I know too many people who say, he hasn't talked to his sister in 40 years, or whatever, so-and-so did this to such and such, and isn't that terrible? And what I wanted to explore is not only can you change, but why people change. The main character in this is 79 years old. She's enormously successful. She has alienated just about everyone close to her, and she now has this huge business to leave. She's alienated her colleague, and so she's left with 3 grandchildren. And none of them want the kingdom that she's offering. So how does is a person like that, if she would even consider returning Teshuvah, to apologize, is she doing it because she realizes, hey, I have limited time left, and I don't want to be alone. I don't want to be isolated. I'm frightened. Or does it mean, oh my God, there really is a limit, and I want something? I didn't attempt to answer it completely for her, because it would be too neat. I mean, it would be too neat even for me as the first reader of the novel. But I wanted to have, and Teshuvah, which says, and one of her grandchildren suggests, if you go out and you apologize once, you do have to apologize to God, but you apologize once, and then if not a second, and then you're obliged to go back a third time. It was fascinating to me, both in terms of her character, but also that there's so much in people say Jewish life is, and Jewish laws, we're so legalistic, but it really seems very, very practical, Dear Abby advice, in an extremely, imagining a philosophical, sophisticated Abbey.
I have to say, as a fan, in reading the book, Gloria is really a thoroughly dislikable character. And I was deeply moved, not only by the fact that she faced this alienation of her whole family and changed, but I also think you hit it on the head by not plumbing too deeply as the author what the interior motives are, because sometimes they're a mystery to us as well, and yet the change is real. Mm-hmm. So I'm very appreciative. Before I ask you to talk about the possibility of change in character, whether it's Luke and Alexandra or any of your bad guys, I want to ask the audience, I hope it's the case that when you came in, you were offered an index card and a golf pencil if you wanted to ask questions. So this is a good time to, if you haven't already scribbled your questions, start scribbling. And Bonnie has just gone out. She's going to pass out some more. If you want one, this would be a good time. If you want a card and don't have one, raise a hand. And then when Linda is finished, we're going to collect these, and I'll sort through them, and we'll do a rapid-fire round of audience questions for our authors as well. Ms. Fierstein, yes. Do people really change? Is there a possibility of doing Teshuvah? I
think people are capable of change, and the minor ways, not the change you're talking about when you said before you asked the question. I think you try to show in a series how something like the jobs these characters have, how what they face every day, which is homicide and sexual assault and whatever, how these serious things impact their lives and affect their abilities to grow and change and have relationships with other people, because that's sort of what my colleagues and I lived every day. My chance to do what Susan's done, and I've not done it, of course, not with her skill and not in depth like that, but is through the bad guys in the book and through some of the victims who have gone from being bad people to better people, but get killed anyway. So it's I've not explored it in any sense the way Susan has, but the answer is, do I think people are capable? Can I ask you a question off the page, though? Because sure.
you did prosecute these horrific crimes for years, and you write about them now all the time. They're really there with you. How has that changed you?
Enormously in many, many ways. I mean, I came to the DA's office in 1972, and some of you remember that. Frank Hogan was the district attorney. There were 200 lawyers in the office. 7 were women. Mr. Hogan didn't think the courtroom, and many of you are in professions like this, didn't think the courtroom was an appropriate place for women to work. So we didn't try cases until 2 years after I got there. And there were no special victims units anywhere in this country, not in police departments, not in prosecutors' offices. So I went from being a nice Jewish girl from Mount Vernon, New York, who went to Vassar and studied English Lit and went to law school. And it terrified my father, quite frankly, that what I was doing every day was going sort of to the bowels of the criminal courthouse and dealing with a very rough element and becoming an expert, as he used to say, on body parts that people don't talk about in polite conversation. It matured me quickly. It's impacted me in a great many ways, and in how I spend my time and who my friends are and the man I married. So a lot of ways. All for seeing horrible things, but I went in as an optimist, and I come away seeing how much change we've made in 40 years when victims couldn't testify because the laws in this country were so archaic that the word of a woman making a report of sexual assault was deemed not credible unless there was proof. Witness the use of DNA forensically in the mid-1980s, which nobody dreamed possible in the 70s. So there's a lot of good that came out of it, but it's was not always the most upbeat job to have.
So you've changed, and thank God the country and the laws have changed as well. Here, too, I have to gush a little bit as a fan because it's very possible reading your books, particularly the crimes that are perpetrated, are really kind of soul-crushing. They're really very depressing. And yet, your character...
The books do have some humor in them, folks.
Well, what I want to say is your character is able to find joy, whether it's with a lover or a good meal or just the banter of her friends at the end of the day. And it's really exceptionally heartening to show how someone can find balance in their life, even as they work in a very difficult situation. And it can be a prosecutor in a special victims unit. It could be someone working in an oncology unit. It could be someone teaching learning disabled children. I mean, there's all kind of challenges that we face. And I think you show a path for balance in life and finding joy nonetheless. I want to ask you, if you have a question on your card, only on your card, hold it up so that we can collect them. And I hope you've all written in your best penmanship. I am actually trained to read manuscripts, so I kind of welcome the challenge.
Definitely.
But I only read manuscripts in Aramaic. So yeah, indeed, someone shares my cynicism. The first question they ask is, and I think this is really for both of you because you both think about these issues. Can someone who commits a heinous crime truly change? Do you think the perpetrators ever change?
I used to think that more as a young prosecutor, and I remember making decisions, especially with young offenders, often to give them a break on the theory that they'd been confronted by a very tough system and that remorse was possible and that rehabilitation was possible. I saw many of them back. I'm sure there were people who made it, and I've seen many of them back through again. So it's hard for me to draw an example of someone who did something heinous to tell you who's changed for the better, but Susan probably can.
Well, no, I want to ask you, what about people who were sex offenders, who they say they cannot reform?
Well, that's probably the toughest area. There are more people who've committed homicides who have been rehabilitated. The sad news about sex offenders, and a lot of places tried to rehabilitate them after the issue was discovered as a crime. It had obviously gone on forever, but after in the 70s when it was sort of recognized as a crime with unique problems, and there were offender treatment centers in Avenel, New Jersey, and particular prisons. And about 10 years ago, most of the psychological community agrees that pedophiles, for example, and serial sex offenders, that there is no known means of rehabilitation. Are there the occasional guy who commits a sexual assault on an acquaintance who gets therapy and is rehabilitated? Yes. I mean, I've seen people go on to lead productive lives, but the overall picture in the field is not a happy one.
This is a question that is actually quite striking because it says there have been wonderfully strong and competent women in literature, Elizabeth Bennet, Dorothea Brooks, Jane Eyre, etc. How are your wonderfully strong women 21st century women?
Actually, in 1998 or 99, I wrote a book called Brave Dames and Wimpettes, What Women Are Really Doing on Page and Screen, about why so many women in the current fiction and film and TV were not the equals, say, to the moral character of a Jane Eyre. And we're not routinely betrayed their friends for a guy, et cetera, et cetera. And how are they 21st century women? I mean, I really can't say, because I think women are evolving. I mean, the opportunities that I would have had in the year I was born, and then how my life turned out, it's changed amazingly. So, and I've changed with it. I don't think it matters a whit that I wrote my first novel on a typewriter and I'm now using speech recognition. I mean, it matters in the sense that the path from brain to page is quicker. But I think we're creatures who live in a wonderful, fluid culture, who've been given incredible freedoms and benefits. And so I don't think there's such a thing as a 21st century person unless they're 12 years old.
Counselor, would you like to rebut her?
I would never rebut her, but I would just say, from the crime novel perspective in particular, what's interesting, the great history of women in crime fiction, Agatha Christie, and the characters created solving mysteries were amateur sleuths, because women couldn't and didn't hold those jobs. So Miss Marple would, be called in if somebody stumbled over the vicar's body in the churchyard and it was poison mushrooms, whatever. And that was that was sort of the creation of women in crime fiction. And now the 21st century best-selling crime fiction novelists are forensic anthropologists. They're forensic pathologists. There are courtroom dramas with lawyers on both sides all over the place. I mean, jobs that you couldn't do then. And for me, Bob Morgenthau changed that picture to an extraordinary extent. Cy Vance has done more. I've got this group of young women who trained under me, and they run the DA's office under Cy Vance. Vote early next year. Again, and it's something I see with enormous pride, because it's such a different door than the one that we pried open when I got in the 70s. So not everybody considers crime fiction literature, but in crime fiction, you see characters now, women characters with entirely different jobs, and the amateur sleuth just rarely cuts it anymore. You can't do DNA if you're, you got to work with the lab. You got to have the cell phone analyzed. You got to be able to check out social media. So it's fun for me to see that change in this genre.
I feel obligated by the virtue of the fact that we're at the Jewish Theological Seminary to ask this question that someone in the audience asked, which is that Teshuvah actually is not just returning and changing, it's a turning to God. Do either of you see a role for God in your fiction writing? That look of panic.
No.
No.
Well, not as a character. But yes, this is I don't know. I think there's a role for Judaism and Jewish thinking and Jewish ethics in fiction. Whether or not someone has a certain religious belief, that might come up. But in terms of the kind of old-fashioned fatherly God that you see in Christian fairy tales that moves events or stops storms,
Not so much.
no. And or even that. I mean, the closest I've seen to it was in the Coen Brothers' A Simple Man, which struck me. The Coen Brothers claimed they didn't mean that when he changes, the professor changes the student's grade and then immediately gets a call and says, there's a spot on your lungs, you need to come into my office, that he's being punished. But I think that is one of the rare works of fiction that deals directly with humanity, I'm 20th century, humanity and God, rather than the rules that God laid down.
And I want to turn this to you because the novel before this most recent one, Nightwatch, the one before that, Silent Mercy, is virtually all set in churches and synagogues. Gruesomely so, but...
Thank you again. Yeah, I mean, I agree with Susan. It would be somebody else to do the visual Christian God having a role in things, or Jewish God. But my last book was all about religion, and the victims were all killed because the victims were all women who took a controversial role in their religion. So the first one murdered was Jewish, and was her body was left in a church in Harlem, which had been a synagogue. And if you know the history, which I didn't, of the fact that there are 12 churches now, Catholic and Baptist, in Harlem that were built and decorated as synagogues when Central Harlem was largely a Jewish community for a brief period of time, and then moves on into churches for women being killed for exactly the same reasons, for being heretical in their own, whether Catholic or some of the Protestant sects. So it was my intention to talk about religion in that way, but not having anybody part the seas or whatever.
I want to close with a story about two of my teachers, may they rest in peace. One a little younger, one a little older. The older, Saul Lieberman, may he rest in peace, who was a great Talmudist, asked the younger, Yochanan Mofs, who was a Bible scholar, and Lieberman was always clever. He said, "Mofs, who is the most tragic character in the Bible?" And Mofs thought about it for a while, and he thought, Moses. After all, he never got to the Promised Land. Lieberman says, "No, not Moses. He said, Bathsheba. No, not Bathsheba. Moths, the most tragic character in the Bible, is God. So on that note, let me just, one final question, which is apropos, and I'm really going to compliment you, and I mean this compliment fully, because we're talking to two Jewish writers, and of course, we can't think of the term Jewish writer without thinking of Philip Roth. So I want to put you in that good company. But Philip Roth has recently announced he's done, and he has described really poignantly how brutal the process is. Now, mindful that neither of you is not even remotely near 80, do you imagine, first of all, is it as draining as he says, and do you imagine ever being done?
I don't imagine ever being done. I mean, it's I guess because I think, like a writer, I mean, everything is material for a story. Almost everybody I come across or circumstance in which I find myself is something that I sometimes force too much, but feel like it's going to wind up as material for a story someday. I'd love not to be on the treadmill of a book a year, which Susan's smart enough not to do, but is the series the nice thing? If you have a series and continuing characters, you're sort of compelled to try and present a book on a regular basis. So I'd like to do my standalones a little more leisurely when I run out of steam with Alex. But I can't imagine. I love writing. I don't always like going into the room alone and closing the door and figuring that my friends have learned not to call me till a certain time of day. But I do love the process of creating stories and making up people, and the great joy when somebody relates to them and wants to read them and wants more. So I can't even believe Philip Roth that he won't be driven to write something again. Maybe not on deadline, but I think he's a writer.
I've been writing my very adult son is here, and I've been writing fiction ever since he's been 6 years old. I mean, it's my life. I have nothing else to turn to during. I mean, I'm not going to take tennis lessons, and also. If characters keep coming to me and say, tell my story, that's a gift. That's a gift, and I'm gonna say, wow, this is mine, and I'm gonna do it. I mean, there may come a time. I don't know. Roth says it's over, and then. If he lives till 82, that's a good decision. If he's 93, he'll do a lot of reading.
Or maybe take tennis lessons.
Right.
Before I get to the requisite announcements that any rabbi finishes the service with, I just personally, and I'm sure on behalf of the audience, I just want to thank two extraordinary writers for this marvelous conversation. Linda and Susan, thank you so much. The evening is not quite over because we have books outside if you want to purchase books. They will sign them for you, I'm sure, quite happily. There are also refreshments. You should eat and be happy. On December the 13th, the Jewish Theological Seminary, the same Finkelstein Institute, is very proud to host General Norton Schwartz. He's speaking on Shalom, Shalom, Yet There Is No Peace, Waging Peace and Making War. Norty Schwartz is the immediate past chief of staff of the United States Air Force, a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the highest-ranking Jew ever in the United States military. December 13th, that's Hanukkah, so he's going to be our Maccabee. And on January 24th, also at 7:30, the Chief Justice of the New Jersey Supreme Court, Stuart Rabner, is going to speak about his now famous decision basically disrespecting eyewitness identification as being useful in court. So December 13th and January 24th, I hope we'll see you. Enjoy the evening. Thank you.
Thank you.